data-driven storytelling is in fact the way to go, right? News is evolving, how we consume information is evolving, the different channels that we have to consume information. Not everybody's number one way of learning is by reading. My mom is a software engineer and my dad is an attorney, an immigration attorney. And growing up, I always had these two kind of not competing, but different influences in my life from my mom and from my dad, right? My mom was always encouraging me to do technology projects in my outside of school and in my free time, encouraging me to work on computers and learn to code, and that was kind of her influence on me. And my dad always pushed civic impact, right? What's the difference that you can make in the world? What's the difference that you can make in our society? What's the difference that you can make in people's lives? And those kind of two influences took me all the way through college. I studied political science. I at the time, there was not this thing that we know now called civic technology, right? And so I kind of felt like at the time, this is more than 10 years ago now, I had to choose between public impact and technology. And I love technology, but at the time, it was people making products. That was the tech industry. And it still is a large part of the tech industry, right? But there wasn't this drive for social impact and public good like companies like Nava, where I work now, have, right? And so I studied political science with the idea that I would get into policy and maybe attend law school, maybe pursue an impact in that way. But those studies in university led to my first job, where I worked in a state senator's office. And I realized pretty early on that I really enjoyed the communications, the media relations, the messaging part of that work. And that took me on to service the Peace Corps. I served at the U.S. Peace Corps mission in Guatemala, where I led their media and communications team, and that was a really cool experience. We produced a number of different type of materials. It was mostly program communications, so not as much press, but a little bit of owned media and program communications. And it was neat because that was my first true experience in a cross-cultural environment, bringing American programs and services to indigenous Mayan communities in Guatemala that speak 27 different Mayan languages. Was pretty neat. From there, moved back to the US, worked for GSA, which is a pretty large government organization, in their marketing and communications division, doing more marketing. Realized that the marketing part of communications isn't really my most favorite thing, click-through rates and all that stuff, conversions and yada yada. But learned about it a little bit. I think it's an important skill to have. From there, that was kind of a moment for me when I realized that there are in fact people that are working on technology in a public impact capacity, right? At GSA, there's an organization called 18F that specifically uses technology to modernize government services. I joined up with a nonprofit group called Code for America. We created Code for Chicago, which is it still exists. It's a nonprofit small chapter of Code for America that exists in the city of Chicago. They work on technology projects that impact local government. When I was there, we worked with the Chicago Public Library. And I realized from these kind of volunteer opportunities and tangentially being exposed to this in my day job that I wanted to pursue this, this kind of civic impact, public impact technology as a career. And so after that, I joined the U.S. Digital Service. I worked for 3 years with the U.S. Digital Service at the White House. That was really cool. Being there, being kind of at the tip of the spear in government is a really unique and challenging experience. You have a lot of autonomy, you have a lot of influence, but you also have a lot of challenges. And you can kind of there's a U.S. president who said the buck stops here, and kind of that's sort of how it is with USDS, right? Any kind of high impact technology fire, it's not possible to just blame somebody else, right? We need to take responsibility and ownership and address an issue that potentially impacts millions of people across the country. So that's a term limited role. Many positions at the White House are limited to tours. So the USDS kind of maxed out at 4 years time. So in my third year, I left. Midway through my third year, I left. I joined the US Department of Health and Human Services. This is like 2021. The newly created Office of the Chief Data Officer there. It's kind of, it's a mouthful, but a lot of data, right? And it was in the midst of the pandemic. So their whole thing was using data from different sources, right? But nationwide data to forecast trends in the pandemic, to predict outbreak trends, to more specifically target like how therapeutics are distributed, things like that, right? And so that was a really exciting opportunity to kind of get in from a comms perspective, from the ground up, right? Total greenfield in terms of creating a brand, a narrative, like colors, logo. We hired an art team and got to art direct, some of the more visual elements of that. That was a lot of fun. And that led me to where we are now with Nava. Nava is a public benefit corporation. Our founders were recruited by President Obama when healthcare.gov crashed in 2013. And they worked on a part of the healthcare.gov rescue and went on to create Nava Public Benefit Corporation, which is a company or a private company, but we work on projects that specifically have a public impact, public good, and clearly demonstrable, serve demonstrably vulnerable populations. I think that all of the exposure that I got from my mom in, computer science as a kid is really helpful to me every single day, right? In terms of talking to engineers, understanding what they're referring to. But I think, one thing that's really important for people in this field, right, in technology communications is kind of the ability. We don't have to be experts. I'm not an engineer. I couldn't do those projects as well as they could, but being able to kind of extract from the technical bits, be that data, be that code, being able to extract like, what does this actually do and why does it matter, right? Who does it help? Who does it benefit? And using that to tell your story, right? There are, of course, there's audiences that are interested in like the under the hood, the twiddly bits, the raw data. But I think most audiences are more curious about the implications of data, right? And why it matters, why it helps people. So, for example, if we are launching a new software platform that helps people access, say, like paid leave programs, for instance, right? What kinds of folks are going to be interested in that? Who's covering these types of topics? What are the important things that we want people to know in terms of like getting new users onboarded and so on and so forth. And then when it comes to data, figuring out like what's salient to people, right? For that audience, they're probably not interested in our like load testing, for example, right? Like that's important, but that's important maybe for program managers, important for stakeholders. It's not really important for the user base, for instance, right? And so understanding more about more things like data is a broad term, right? But like understanding stats, right? About like what, how much funding is available for this program, how many people can be onboarded, what are some successes that we have now, right? From a numerical perspective, those things can complement the narrative that we're trying to tell, which is, hey, there's a new platform that makes it easy to enroll in these benefits. You should sign up for it, essentially, right? I always look for like the human interest component, right? So, things like, uptime and load stats and things like that are like kind of interesting from a technology perspective. And so if that's your audience, then that's definitely something you can go to, right? But I think most of the time when we're pitching stories or working together with our partners on stories, we try to lean into the things that underscore kind of like the human interest component, right? Who is helped, how are they helped, and like what does this mean for the future? Why does this matter for other people? I typically ask people with like more strong technical skills to help me understand those insights. I'll come with the questions of like, hey, how many people were able to enroll in this in the first day? Hey, do we see any trends in terms of like, people abandoning their application midway through, right? Like I'll ask some of those questions, but I don't specifically have the skill set to extract some of those, or the access, right, to extract some of those insights from our projects. So I rely on, members of the technical project team to help with that. I would say if I could give myself, my 10 years ago self, some advice, it would be that sometimes in communications, there's a lot of like cooks in the kitchen. We have executive stakeholders, we have partners, we have like other organizations. Sometimes there's, news outlets involved, right? And so there's a lot of like cooks in the kitchen is like a phrase that we use in the US. That can be hard, but I wish that I would have learned, this is a lesson I learned from my time at USDS at the White House, but everybody wants something, right? And that can be like in some personally or like for their job function or something like that, right? So like everybody has something that they're trying to get out of their job, which is why they're doing it. And so if there's a way to kind of like make a particular comms deliverable good for everyone, it makes it easier to kind of like get through, approvals and get to yes, right? Like people in our field like dread this idea of like the approval process, right? People ask in interviews, to join Nava, like, what's your guys' like typical approval process look like? And like, well, the answer is it depends, right? Depends on the project, depends on the situation. But nobody likes that. And so in any field, in government, in business, like there's always some kind of stakeholder, right? And so as communications people, we're a support function. That's like something else, I think important to remember. It doesn't mean that we're, again, less important, but it does mean that we have to try to align with the preferences a lot of other folks. That's how we're going to be successful in our role. And so if I would have known that like 10 years ago, who knows? Would have avoided a lot of mistakes.